What's up YouTube? Today I'm going to be going over these Shimano SLX 4-piston brakes plus the handful of modifications that I've done to them and how these have affected the performance. Let's get into it. So these are the stock brakes that came on my Giant Rain E+2, and in stock form I was super impressed. It had been a while since I'd been on Shimano 4-piston brakes. And I don't think I've ever really been on a more budget option. So these SLX brakes were honestly super impressive. They don't have the nice rotors, 200 mil front and rear on a heavy 54-pound e-bike. I honestly don't feel a super big difference between these and a Shimano XT pair that I tried fairly recently. And the power was really impressive. I think there's more to be desired, especially on a bike this heavy, but it definitely wasn't super undergunned. Brand new out of the box, they were really on point, kind of had that shorter lever throw with a really positive contact that I come to appreciate out of Shimano brakes. But when you do get them into like longer descents, they start heating up. The bite point does start to wander a little bit, and then I do feel like I'm having to squeeze them a little harder than I would maybe my TRPs that I've become quite fond of. Jack Harle from the Vessel Bike Project hit me up at Sea Otter, and he had these custom fabbed, crazy looking Shimano levers that he fabbed up. And I guess the whole goal is that, you know, a longer lever should create more power. So that moment that I'm talking about where I'm having to kind of pull on the levers a little harder than I would like to get the power out of the brakes, I mean, you're pulling on a longer lever, so ultimately that should result in a lighter lever pull for the same amount of power. The process to get these installed wasn't super straightforward, but I was able to get it done. At that point, when I had these levers installed for the first time, the brakes had deteriorated. I'd put a decent amount of miles on it, so the bleed wasn't that sweet. And these levers pretty much magnified everything about the brakes. The strong points and the weaknesses of these brakes were just, you know, compounded, because it did give you more power, but it was also a lot touchier. And then when the bite point did wander, it wandered way more. So I would think I was dealing with kind of a shoddy bleed, and it was tolerable with the short levers, but with these longer levers, it just made the problem way worse, and the wandering bite point ended up wandering way more. So it took me a few tries to get a really bomber bleed on these, and that's what Jack said needed to happen to get these levers working well. But then even after I got that dialed in, one thing I needed to do was shorten up this lever throw. Jack recommended that you do the aftermarket contact adjust. You remove the kind of dummy screw that's in there, and then go to the hardware store, pick up an M4 screw and send that thing in there, and then you basically unlock these brakes into a pair of XTs. To my knowledge, that's the only difference in between an SLX and an XT. So regardless if you're running these levers, that's a good little hack to shorten up the lever throw on your brakes. That's kind of when these levers started to make a lot more sense. It still took a bit of an adjustment period because they are touchier, but I was surprised at how well I adjusted to that. And whatever Jack did with the curve and the feel of these levers, they hit hard, and the ergonomics I feel like are actually pretty good. I was messing with some other adjustments on my bike, and I ended up going a bit too stiff on the shocks. So I was riding some longer descents, and I was getting bucked forward onto the front of the bike a little bit, and I was really pumping up in my arms, and I think that was the main symptom of it. But with arm pump, these brakes are a handful to ride, because unless you're really on point in finessing that feather zone where they are either, you know, on or off, it really makes it kind of tough when your upper body's fatigued and you don't have the dexterity in your fingers. But once I solved that and rode the bike a bit more, you know, the arm pump thing wasn't a problem, and I was able to appreciate these levers. One thing it does do is that weird kind of initial lever resistance that Shimano's have. It's like it takes a higher amount of force to get them into the stroke, but once they're moving, they're really light. This kind of makes that transition between that initial force to get the lever to move and then where it's at in its free stroke. It kind of feels like it levels that out, and that initial pull is really light, kind of getting more similar to the TRPs. Not quite, but it kind of brings that lighter lever feeling into these brakes. These were designed to give you more power at the sacrifice of a bit of modulation, which Shimano's arguably have less of in the first place. But Jack comes from an RC racing background, and he says he's really developed the dexterity to handle like really sensitive inputs. So for him, that's not an issue. For me, it took a little bit of adjustment, and I would say maybe they're a hair touchy for what I like. But I was also riding in really loose over hard pack terrain that was pretty skatey, so definitely not the ideal situation for these brakes. I think where these brakes would shine is in a bit of a higher traction environment and really long descents where you do get the brakes hot and they might start to fade a little bit, and you can rely on these levers to give you more power. Where I noticed it in more specific environment is getting this bike into a stoppie. If you miss that initial balance point and then you had to really rely on the power of the brake to hold you into the stoppie, I could tell I was really getting a lot of power out of the brake without having to wrench on the lever. And besides just the sensitive feel of the actual contact point on these brakes, maybe the biggest complaint that I had is even with the dialed in contact adjustment, sometimes it just felt like the lever throw was a little too big to get the contact point where I wanted it to be comfortable. The lever would rest just a little further out, and I think you can see in some of the footage it looks like I'm just having to reach a little bit to get the lever into its throw. Definitely, I think, accomplished the design purpose of these longer levers. Plus, they look freaking badass. Something Jack whipped up by himself, probably in his garage. I think this is a pretty badass little upgrade. And then combined with the free stroke adjustment mod, I would say they definitely improve the performance of the brake as long as you're able to deal with a little bit more sensitivity on the levers. One thing I had to do was go to a different bar. I was running the 1-up bars, and like the oval shape goes pretty far into the bar. Plus I run my bars really narrow at 760, so I wasn't actually able to move the brake far enough inwards to where I want. So I had to switch to these Envy bars I had. If I put it against my TRPs, I would still have to give it to the TRPs. You guys can check out my review of those brakes. The lever throw on those are so light. I've had to do so little maintenance to those brakes to keep them feeling good that they, I don't know, they really check all the boxes for me. I'm hoping to try the Mavens soon. But for a more budget option, the SLX brakes I think are an absolute beast for what they are. And yeah, doing these few little mods definitely improved the performance. If you were running these levers full time, you would really have to be on top of your bleeds and make sure these brakes are dialed in. And that's something I'm not too good at. I'm not super good at keeping up on my maintenance. And that's one thing I really appreciate about the TRPs is they seem to like hold a really positive lever feel with hardly any maintenance. Yeah, either way, that's my 2 cents on these brakes. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.